I grew up in a home that was filled with music. From my earliest days, I remember quartets practicing at our house. My father sang in quartets. My mother played the piano, mostly by ear, and she also sang. They both had fairly remarkable singing voices. And my mother's family also was very musical. Not my father's family. I didn't have music at that house very much. But my mother's family, with whom we were more closely associated, both of them were also involved in music. So I just grew up thinking that was the way it was. My father actually went around at that time to small churches and had singing schools. And he would teach the choirs to sing using shaped notes. And you bought hymn books back then with the notes in shape. And each note of the octave had a different shape. And so it was very easy once you found the pitch for do to do a scale and to sing songs that you didn't know. And that is no longer in any kind of practice, but in the late 30s, early 40s, 1930s and 40s, that was fairly common. And so he did a lot of that. So I grew up with music. And when I went to college, it was just assumed I would be in music. And so they had formed a new choir at Berea, and so I was in that immediately. And then they had an organization called the Harmonia Society that did usually 2 big oratorios each year, and I also sang in that. And was just involved in the music department. And when I got to be a senior, then I had to make a decision of really what was I going to do with music. And so I didn't know, but I always tried to be practical. And so I decided I would major in music education just in case that I could make a living if nothing else worked out. So I took education classes, and second semester I had to do student teaching. And that particular semester, I think there were 8 of us in music education who had to be assigned somewhere to teach. Berea had an arrangement with Pulaski County Schools, and most of the people went there. But they didn't have enough openings, and so Eileen Gunter and I were picked to go to Broadhead, which was in the adjoining county, and they had never had a music teacher there, and still did not have a music teacher. And so the education, Dr. Ambrose at Berea, took us over there and introduced us and stuck me in I think it was a 2nd grade room, and said, teach them a song. And so I had a class in music education, so I knew a few little songs, so I taught them a song. And I realized that teaching was really performing. All of a sudden I was in front of an audience, and they responded. These little children really got into it. And so I did my student teaching at Broadhead. It was a 12th grade school. And they had never had they had no music, they didn't have a record player, they had a piano. They did not have a music book or a sheet of music of any kind. So Berea had some old music books on the elementary level in the storage room, and they let me have some of those. And then I did a lot of printing, mimeograph stuff, and rote teaching. And I taught at Broadhead and prepared a spring program. And in the meantime, the principal had asked me if I would come there to teach and how much money I would have to have. This was way before the minimum foundation went in Kentucky and equalized salaries and set standards for pay. And so I just flippantly said $3,000 because that's what they were paying in Louisville at that time. And so he didn't talk to me anymore about it. And then on the night of my spring program, after it was over, he asked me to stay up on the stage, and he came up there, and he told me that the children had donated their milk money. Now, this was a very poor county, and the little children had donated their milk money to give me a check because student teachers didn't get any pay. And so he gave me the check, and I was so moved. I said, "Is your offer still good?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "I'll take it." So I made my decision on the spur of the moment there. So that began my teaching experience. I graduated that June, and I was asked by another Dr. Ware in the education department if I would travel with him around the region near Berea, several counties, and hold workshops and teach elementary teachers who were not music certified, but who had to teach music as part of their curriculum, some songs and some things to do. So I traveled with him, I think it was for 2 months, maybe just 6 weeks, to different schools and worked with teachers. So here I am, this unexperienced, but experienced from having had to teach without supervision and just feeling my way. So that was the beginning of my music experience. I went back to Broadhead, and it was a 25-mile drive, and I really didn't know how to drive because I had only gotten a car the day before I went up there. And my father actually talked to the state police ahead of time about my desperate situation, and they gave me a license. And I use that term not just loosely. I passed the written test, but I learned to drive on Highway US 25 on the way to school and back. We did not have phones at that time. I didn't even have a phone in my apartment. And so I went over to the school. It was 25 miles. And I went over there, and it started to snow, and they sent everybody home. Another time I went, and before I even got out of the car, they said, "We're closed for the day." So I went back home. So after that, if it looked like it was snowing or going to snow, I was, I guess, kind of loose about appearing for work. Until one day I saw a note on the bulletin board that said, "It's cloudy, Miss Harrell probably won't be here today." And so that was for the other teachers to know they wouldn't bring their children to music. So I kind of shaped up then and moved over there so that I was closer and I could tell what the weather was going to be. So that was the beginning of my teaching experience.
I want to tell you a little bit more today about the school where I first taught when I graduated college. It was in a county that was economically depressed. There was no industry at all. A U.S. highway went through the town and made a sharp turn right in the center of town, and so traffic had to slow down there. And the downtown did not have a traffic light. It was consisted of about a block on each side of that sharp turn. There was a restaurant, a bank, a furniture store, a grocery store, a motel, and then another one that was like a motel that had little cabins, another restaurant. But there was not any industry at all for the young people growing up. They mostly had to leave there and go to work in Cincinnati, which was the nearest really big city. And on an unusual thing that I'd never heard of, on Fridays actually, people tried to park down near the turn so they could see who was coming home for the weekend. The young men mostly all went away, and that was a big thing, was to go park your car early so you could sit in your car and watch when they slowed down for that turn, you could see who was coming back to town for the weekend. Now remember, there was no internet. There was very little TV. I was there from 1954 through 1956. There was no phones, personal phones. So it was a different time. But the thing about this school, and there were 3 little towns in this county, and the one I was in was the smallest of the 3. They all had a school that went from first grade through senior in high school, and I never knew of any other school who did what this school did, and that's what I want to tell you about. Every year, at the end of the school year, the principal and his wife and 3 other teachers took a trip, and they took along with them the entire senior class. And the class probably consisted, I don't know exactly now, it's been a long time, it's been about 70 years. But I was invited to go along on this trip. And at the time, I realized that it was something wonderful, but now that I look back on it, it becomes even more. I think about the thought that this principal had to do this, to take these children. They did not have to pay 1 penny to go. A few parents would not let their children go. This was a rural area, and most of these children, I don't think a single one of them had ever ridden in an elevator or on an escalator. They had, many of them, not been outside their county. We went in a school bus, and they took out the back 2 rows of seats to put the luggage in. And and I'm going to tell you, as best I can remember, I know the first night we went to Natural Bridge, Virginia, and at that time they had a music light show there, and you sat down and they shined the lights on all these rock formations and the arches and played music, and so we saw that show and spent the night. The next day we went to Luray Caverns in Virginia. I had never been there. It was a beautiful place. We did a tour down in the caves and saw a program there. They had music that played, and then we went to Washington, D.C., and I believe we stayed there 3 nights. And we toured every day. We saw all the monuments, and we left there and went to New York City. And we stayed 3 nights in New York City. And we went to the Hayden Planetarium. We toured Central Park. We saw the Rockettes show at, we went to a TV radio recording station. TV was brand new then. A lot of people had a TV, but most people did not. After we left New York, we went north to West Point and toured that military facility and saw some things on the parade ground. And then we went to Hyde Park to see Roosevelt's home. And then we went across New York to Niagara Falls. And then we went into Canada, drove through Canada to Detroit and back home. Every time we stopped, the business teacher took care of the money, and he would get off first, and he gave everybody $1 for breakfast. And at that time, you could get a biscuit and sausage and egg for $1. And at lunch, we got another $1, and you could get a hamburger or a sandwich for $1 and a drink. And then for dinner, we got $5. And the teachers were treated just like the students. We all got our $1 and our $5 every time we got off. And as I look back on that, I think it was wonderful for me because I had never been to New York City and seen all those things. And I had not spent time in Washington, D.C. So it was a wonderful trip for me too. But when I look back on it, I think about he did this every year for the class. And how they paid for it was interesting too. I always thought it was so sad that some of the parents did not see the value in it and wouldn't let their children go. But in the fall, they bought little pigs, and on the back of the school ground, there was a little fenced-in pig pen, and they fattened those pigs. And when the cold weather was still on, along about February, they sold the pigs, and they made the money to take that senior trip. We had to excuse 2 boys were assigned, 2 different boys each week, so they didn't get behind, were assigned to go out and feed the pigs at the 5th period. That was right after lunch, and they took the scraps from the lunchroom and fed the pigs. And so that raised a big lot of their money. The other thing they did to raise money was they had a senior day in the lunchroom in the spring. And most of these children lived on farms, and so they brought in apples and cabbage and carrots and peas and potatoes and whatever they had, and that's what we fed in the lunchroom that day. And all the money taken in for lunch was put in the senior fund. And the teachers also sold candy, and part of that was used to pay the music teacher and the coach. But what was left was put in the senior fund. And so they went to the same place every year. They stayed in the same hotels. They went to the same place, the same museums. And these kids were well enough behaved that the people welcomed them back. And I just think I've never heard of another school doing that. Certainly there wasn't one in that area that was. And I'm sure regulations now would prevent that from happening. But I'm talking 70 years ago when there weren't all those regulations. And each school could kind of do what they felt was best for their students. And as I look back, I have so much respect for that principal who cared enough to give his time and effort to see that those children got that education outside of school.